Welcome to Men Rising Strategic Analysis. I am so glad you are joining me today for this journey into the heart of power and ambition. Settle in and get comfortable because we are about to go deep. Imagine for a second that you are 20 years old. Just 20. Most people at that age are still trying to figure out their major or wondering if they should text their exes back. But imagine being 20 years old and deciding you know what, I am just going to own the entire known world. No big deal, right? Damn, it is honestly hard to even wrap our modern brains around that kind of audacity. Alexander did not just conquer lands, he rewrote the very DNA of human civilization. He was not just a king, he was a force of nature that crashed into the shores of history and changed the flow of the tides forever. You can almost feel the dust of the Macedonian plains clinging to your skin and hear the distant thunder of thousands of marching feet. He stood on the edge of the known world and looked at the horizon not with fear, but with a sense of total ownership. That is the kind of energy we are talking about here. IT is raw, IT is dangerous, and IT is utterly fascinating. We are stripping away the dusty myths and the marble statues today. We are looking at Alexander through the cold, hard lens of geopolitics and grand strategy. We want to know the truth. Was he a visionary genius who saw a unified world, or was he just an incredibly lucky warlord with an ego the size of a continent? Honestly, IT is a bit of both, and that is exactly what makes this story so compelling. You see, history has a way of polishing the rough edges off these figures, making them seem like gods. But Alexander was flesh and blood. He bled, he doubted, he got angry, and he certainly made mistakes. Yet he accomplished more in 13 years than entire dynasties did in 3 centuries. So as we sit here together, I want you to think about what IT takes to move the needle of history. What does IT take to look at the largest empire on earth, the Persians, and say, mine? IT is not just about bravery. IT is about a specific kind of strategic madness. Before we dive into the maps and the battles, just take a breath and appreciate the sheer scale of the ambition. We are talking about a young man who inherited a stable kingdom and decided IT was not enough. He wanted everything. And for a brief shining moment in time, he actually had it. Stay with me because this is not just a history lesson. IT is a blueprint of leadership power and the inevitable tragedy that comes when a man tries to become a god. First off, let US talk logistics. You know, people love to talk about the glory and the swords, but you absolutely cannot conquer 2 million square miles on vibes alone. Trust me, logistics is the boring stuff that wins wars. Alexander inherited the Macedonian Phalanx from his father, Philip. And man, that Phalanx was a beast. Imagine a wall of shields with 18-foot-long spears called sarissas poking out. IT was like an ancient tank. But Alexander did not just use the tools he was given. His real genius was something called the Spear-Won Land Doctrine. See, most conquerors before him would just go and burn everything, take the gold, and leave. But Alexander realized something profound early on. He realized that if you want to keep an empire, you cannot just be an occupying force. You have to integrate. You have to become the people you conquered. He realized that to truly rule Persia, he could not just be a Greek king sitting on a distant throne. He had to become the Persian king of kings. He started wearing Persian clothes. He adopted Persian court rituals. His own Macedonian generals hated IT. They thought he was turning his back on his roots. But from a geopolitical standpoint, IT was brilliant. He was reducing the friction of occupation. By becoming one of them, he made IT harder for them to justify rebelling against him. IT is a classic move of political adaptation that most leaders today still struggle with. Think about modern nation building. We see the same struggles in the Middle East and other regions today. If you do not understand the local culture, if you do not weave yourself into the fabric of the society, you are just a target. Alexander understood this at 22. He was not just fighting battles, he was conducting a massive experiment in cultural fusion. He married a Bactrian princess named Roxana. He encouraged his soldiers to marry local women. He was trying to create a new kind of human, a Hellenistic citizen of the world. IT was bold, IT was risky, and IT was tactically sound. Now here is the kicker: soft power. Long before modern political scientists coined that term, Alexander was mastering IT. He knew that swords could win battles, but ideas win centuries. This is where the concept of Hellenism comes in. This was not just about soldiers marching across deserts. IT was about the spread of a way of life. Alexander built over 70 cities. And yeah, he named most of them Alexandria. Talk about an ego, right? But these were not just military outposts. They were hubs for trade, language, and culture. He brought Greek philosophers, architects, and scientists with him on his campaigns. He was essentially exporting a brand. He forced the Greek language to become the lingua franca, the common language of the entire region. IT is exactly like how the English language dominates the tech world and international business today. By creating a common language and a common culture, he created a globalized economy 2,300 years before the internet was even a dream. Truly wild when you really think about IT. He made the world smaller. Suddenly, a trader in Egypt could speak the same language as a merchant in Afghanistan. They used the same coins. They followed the same laws. This soft power is what allowed his influence to last long after his physical empire crumbled. Even today, you can find traces of Greek architecture in the mountains of Pakistan. That is not an accident. That is the result of a deliberate strategy to embed Greek DNA into the heart of Asia. He was building a world that would remember him not just as a destroyer, but as a creator. But let US be real for a second. IT was not all glory in winning. The guy was a tactical genius, no doubt about IT. But he was a strategic disaster when IT came to sustainability. And this is the lesson for every leader listening right now. Alexander had no plan B. He had no succession plan. He was so obsessed with his own legend, so convinced of his own divinity, that he never prepared the world for a life without him. When he died in Babylon at the age of 32, the whole thing shattered. Imagine the chaos. The greatest empire ever known, and no one was in charge. His generals, the Diadochi, immediately started tearing each other apart to grab a piece of the pie. Why? Because Alexander built a cult of personality, not a sustainable institution. He was the glue. And once the glue was gone, the whole structure collapsed into decades of civil war. IT is a massive lesson for modern corporations and nation-states. If everything depends on one great man, you are just one fever away from total collapse. IT is pretty tragic, really. He conquered everything, but he secured nothing for the future. He was like a supernova, bright and magnificent, but he burned out so fast that he left only darkness in his wake. He left his heirs to be murdered and his empire to be carved up like a carcass. IT makes you wonder, was IT all worth IT? What is the point of conquering the world if you cannot even ensure your own son survives to see IT? Economically, though, the man was a disruptor in the truest sense of the word. By seizing the Persian treasury, we are talking about thousands of tons of gold that had been sitting idle in vaults for generations. He triggered a massive global economic boom. He took all that wealth and put IT directly into circulation. He paid his soldiers, he built cities, he funded trade routes. He essentially created the first Eurozone, but across 3 continents. He standardized weights and measures. He created a unified currency system. This was revolutionary. The trade routes he opened up stayed active for centuries after he was gone. You could honestly argue that he laid the literal foundation for the Silk Road. He connected the Mediterranean to the heart of Asia in a way that had never been done before. He brought the riches of the East to the markets of the West. This flow of capital changed the world forever. IT created a new class of wealthy merchants and connected distant civilizations. The wealth he unleashed built the great libraries, the massive temples, and the thriving cities of the Hellenistic age. He was the ultimate venture capitalist, except his startup was a global empire, and his seed funding was the stolen gold of kings. So what is the takeaway for US today? What can we learn from this young man who changed the world before he was old enough to be a senator? Alexander shows US that total war and total integration go hand in hand. You cannot truly change the world without understanding the people you are trying to lead. You cannot just force your will on others and expect IT to last. He wore Persian clothes, he married a Bactrian princess, he played the long game even if his own life was cut short. In a modern world of shifting alliances between the United States, China, and the Middle East, that kind of cultural flexibility is still the ultimate weapon. Leadership is not just about strength. IT is about adaptability. IT is about knowing when to be a Macedonian general and when to be a Persian king. IT is about seeing the big picture while commanding the smallest detail. Alexander was a man of contradictions, cruel yet generous, rash yet strategic. But he never stopped moving forward. He had a vision of a unified world, and he was willing to bleed for IT. That is IT for today's deep dive. History is not just about the past. IT is a blueprint for the future. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this. Was Alexander who brought civilization to the East, or was he just a tyrant whose ambition caused untold suffering? There are no easy answers, and that is why we talk about IT. Please send your stories and your perspectives to me at vodokviankni12@gmail.com. I read every single email, and I genuinely value your insights. Do not forget to subscribe to Men Rising Strategic Analysis so you never miss an episode. We have so much more to explore together. Stay sharp, stay curious, and always keep looking for the strategy behind the story. I will see you in the next one. But wait, there is a turning point in this story that most people gloss over, and this is where the real drama lies. You see, to understand Alexander, you have to understand the Siege of Tyre. Imagine an impregnable island city half a mile off the coast with walls 150 feet high. The Tyrians laughed at him. They thought the ocean was their shield. But Alexander did not see an ocean, he saw a construction site. He ordered his men to build a giant causeway, a land bridge literally moving the earth into the sea to reach his enemies. 7 months of brutal, grinding labor under constant fire. This is the definition of unrelenting will. In the modern startup world, we call this the pivot. When the traditional path is blocked, you do not just turn back, you build a new path out of sheer defiance. But, and here is the dark part, when he finally broke through, the anger was total. He did not just win, he crushed the city into the dust. IT was a message to the world: if you stand in the way of my vision, I will redefine geography to destroy you. That's the thing about ambition, IT has a shadow. And as Alexander pushed deeper into Asia, that shadow grew longer. Do you ever wonder what happens to a leader when they start believing their own press releases? Alexander began to believe he was truly the son of Zeus. And this is where the loyalty of his inner circle started to fray. Beyond the strategy and the gold, there was a deep human agony. Picture a tent in the middle of the desert. Alexander is drunk, heated, arguing with Cletus the Black, the very man who saved his life at the Granicus River. In a fit of rage, Alexander drives a spear through his best friend's chest. The silence in that tent must have been deafening. In that moment, he was no longer the liberator of Greece, he was a lonely tyrant trapped in his own magnificence. For 3 days, he sat in his tent and wept, refusing to eat. This is the founder's trap. You build something so big that you lose the very people who helped you start IT. You become an island, just like Tyre, but without the walls to protect your soul. And then the ultimate test came at the edge of the known world, the Hyphasis River in India. Imagine the scene. The monsoon rains are relentless. The soldiers are exhausted, their clothes are rags, their weapons are rusting. They had marched 11,000 miles. And Alexander, ever the visionary, wanted to go further. He wanted the Ganges. He wanted the end of the world. But for the first time in his life, the Macedonian Phalanx said no. They did not rebel with swords, they rebelled with tears. They sat on the ground and refused to move. IT is the most dramatic moment in military history. The unstoppable force finally met the immovable object, human limitation. Alexander was furious, but he realized that even a god cannot lead a dead army. He had conquered kings, but he could not conquer the homesickness of his own men. This is a massive lesson in scalability. Just because your vision is infinite does not mean your resources are. If you push your team past the breaking point, the whole operation will implode, no matter how genius the strategy is. Think about the geopolitical repercussions of that retreat. By turning back, he left a power vacuum in the east that would eventually give rise to the Mauryan Empire. He was accidentally shaping civilizations he would never even see. But as he marched back through the Gedrosian desert, he lost more men to heat and thirst than he ever did in battle. The cost of his pride was written in the bones of his soldiers strewn across the sand. IT makes you wonder, at what point does greatness become cruelty? At what point does the pursuit of a legacy start destroying the very people the legacy is meant to protect? We see this today in tech giants and global conglomerates. The relentless drive for market dominance often comes at a devastating human cost. Alexander was the original disruptor, but he forgot that the world is made of people, not just maps and borders. But the story does not end in the desert, not even close. Imagine Alexander returning to Babylon. He is no longer the radiant young semigod who left Macedonia. He is scarred, weathered, and increasingly paranoid. And then the real blow hits. His dearest companion Hephaestion dies of a fever. This is the emotional critical point. They say Alexander went mad with grief. He crucified the doctor who could not save him. He ordered the sacred fires in every city to be extinguished, a ritual reserved only for the death of a king. In the modern corporate world, we call this the founder burnout. When the person at the top loses their anchor, the entire organization begins to drift. He was no longer calculating maps, he was fighting ghosts. And yet, even in his grief, the strategic brain never truly slept. Do you know what he was planning next? This is the part that truly blows my mind. He was not done. He was collecting a massive fleet in the Persian Gulf. His target: Arabia, Carthage, Italy, and Spain. He wanted to turn the Mediterranean into a Macedonian lake. Think about the geopolitical implications. If Alexander had lived another 10 years, the Roman Empire might never have existed. The entire trajectory of Western civilization would have been rewritten in Greek. He was preparing to pivot from the east to the west. IT is the ultimate scale-up strategy. But here is the lesson: for every entrepreneur, aggressive expansion without consolidation is a death sentence. He was building the second floor before the foundation of the first floor had even dried. Then comes June 323 BC. The heat in Babylon is suffocating. Alexander falls ill after a night of heavy drinking. The rumors start swirling immediately. Was IT poison? Was IT malaria? Or was IT just the sheer exhaustion of a man who had lived 1,000 lives in 32 years? For 10 days the world held its breath. His Macedonian soldiers, the same ones who had mutinied against him in India, were now weeping. They filed past his bed in a silent, harrowing procession. He could no longer speak, only move his eyes. IT is the ultimate tragedy of power. The man who owned the world could not command his own lungs to take another breath. And here is the moment that changed everything. The Zygarnik effect in full force. As he lay dying, his generals leaned in and asked the million-dollar question: to whom do you leave your kingdom? Instead of naming an heir, instead of ensuring stability, Alexander reportedly whispered one word: Credisto, to the strongest. Those 3 words were a grenade tossed into the heart of his empire. He did not want a successor, he wanted a competition. He was so addicted to the struggle that he ensured the war would continue long after he was gone. In business terms, this is the ultimate failure of leadership transition. He destroyed his own legacy because his ego could not accept a world where he was not the center of gravity. The aftermath was pure chaos. His body was not even cold before his generals started carving up the map. But the most surreal part: the body snatching. Ptolemy, one of his smartest generals, literally hijacked Alexander's funeral cortege. He stole the golden sarcophagus and took IT to Egypt. Why? Because in the ancient world, possessing the body of the founder was the ultimate source of legitimacy. IT is like a modern tech giant fighting over the patents and intellectual property of a deceased founder. Without the man, the symbol became the only currency left. The empire shattered into 3 main pieces: the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Asia, and the Antigonids in Macedonia. The unity was gone, but the seed he planted, Hellenism, was now unstoppable. And this is where the logic meets the reality. Alexander failed as a nation builder, but he succeeded as a cultural disruptor. He created a world where a Greek poet could find an audience in Babylon, and a Persian merchant could sell silk in Athens. He broke the walls of the old world and forced humanity into a global conversation. But the cost was measured in millions of lives and the total destabilization of entire regions for centuries. IT makes you wonder, is the progress of civilization always bought with the blood of the innocent? Is every great leap forward driven by the reckless ambition of a man who refuses to be mortal? We are still living in the cracks of the world he broke. But here is the real kicker, the part that no one tells you in the textbooks. The legend of Alexander did not end with his last breath. IT became a curse that haunted the world for centuries. You see, by leaving his empire to the strongest, he did not just spark a war. He created a generation of monsters. His generals' men who had marched by his side for decades suddenly turned into ruthless predators. They did not just fight for land, they fought for his ghost. They dressed like him, they talked like him, they even tried to mimic his strategic genius. But they lacked his soul. This is the ultimate founder trap. When a leader builds a culture based entirely on their own charisma, rather than sustainable values, the moment they leave, the entire ecosystem turns to cannibalism. Think about the modern tech titans whose companies crumble the second the iconic CEO steps down. That is not success, that is a glorified failure of leadership. And the cost, the human cost was staggering. Do you want to know what happened to his family? Roxana, his Bactrian wife. His young son Alexander IV, who never got to wear the crown his father forged in blood. They were murdered, strangled in the dark by the very men who once swore fealty to the king. His mother Olympias met a bloody end as well. Alexander conquered the world, but he could not protect his own bloodline from the ambition he himself had unleashed. This is the bone-deep lesson for every entrepreneur and visionary listening to this. If your pursuit of greatness requires you to burn everything around you, what are you actually leaving behind? Is IT a legacy, or is IT just a smoking crater? We often glorify the hustle and the conquest, but we forget that a true empire is not measured by how much you take, but by how much survives without you. That's the thing about the Zygarnik effect in history. We are drawn to unfinished stories. And Alexander's story is the ultimate unfinished symphony. He was a man who wanted to reach the edge of the world, only to discover that the world has no edge, only constant horizons. He changed the geopolitics of the planet forever. He blended East and West into a cultural cocktail that we are still drinking today. But at his core, he was a lonely boy from Macedonia who never quite figured out how to stop being a warrior and start being a human being. He owned the world, but he was a slave to his own ambition. He was the ultimate strategist, yet he failed the most basic strategic test: sustainability. So as we wrap up this analysis of men rising, I want you to look in the mirror. We all have a little Alexander inside us. We all have that drive to conquer, to build, to be remembered. But ask yourself this: are you building a monument to your ego or a foundation for the future? Are you creating a system that empowers others, or are you just the glue that will eventually fail? History does not remember the comfortable, it remembers the brave. But the truly great are those whose influence continues to grow long after they are gone, not because they commanded it, but because they inspired it. Alexander the Great was a force of nature, a disruptor, a genius, and a tragic figure. He showed us the peak of human potential and the depths of human arrogance. His life is a blueprint for power and a warning label for success. Do not just admire the conquests, learn from the collapse. I want to hear from you. Truly, does greatness always require sacrificing everything? Can you be a global disruptor without destroying your personal life? Or is the crown always bought with blood? Share your thoughts, your struggles, and your own leadership journeys with me. Email me at vadokviengny12@gmail.com. I want to start a conversation with the next generation of leaders. I read every single message and I promise to respond. This has been Men Rising Strategic Analysis. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story moved you, if IT made you think, then my job here is done. But your journey is just beginning. Stay sharp, stay strategic, and remember, the world does not belong to the strongest, it belongs to the ones who build something that lasts. I am signing off for now. Until next time.